I'm Calvin Blackwell, and I'm the chair of the Department of Economics, and more importantly, I'm the chair of Julie Wright's Thesis Committee, which is what we're here to do today. So I just want to provide a little bit of outline for how we're going to do this. I'm going to introduce the members of Julie's committee. I'm going to introduce Julie. Julie is going to give her presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions. So I'm going to ask if you have questions, you're welcome to put those in the chat. We won't address those until the end. You're also welcome to use the raise hand function at the end when we open things up for questions. After the question session is done, then we'll ask everybody who is not on the committee to leave, and the members of the committee will take out their knives and attack Julie. Now we'll just ask her a few questions, and then we'll kind of discuss among ourselves what we think, and then this whole thing will be over. So let me go ahead and just jump in. So we have a quite distinguished committee here. We have Elaine Worzala, who is formerly the director of the Carter Center for Real Estate and is currently, make sure I get this right, the Charles Bendit Scholar and chair of the Center for Real Estate and Urban Affairs at George Washington University. So we're glad to have Elaine here. We also have Chris Mothorpe, who's walked off camera, but he is the associate professor of economics, and he will be taking over my job as chair of the Department of Economics as soon as possible, which in this case is in July. And then finally, we have Wesley Burnett, also formerly of the College of Charleston and currently a research economist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service. So quite an impressive group of people, Julie, that you've put together for your committee. Julie Wright is a candidate for the Master's in Environmental and Sustainability Studies here at the College of Charleston, and this will be a defense of her thesis. Julie's undergraduate degree is from the University of South Carolina, and Julie has been an intern at a variety of places, including South Carolina DNR, the National Weather Service, and most recently in Charleston County government, where she did work with hazards mitigation and flooding. And I think some of that work was an inspiration for what she's done on her thesis. So I'm very excited to see what she has to offer us. So with that, Julie, take it away. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm really excited to share with everyone my research today. I'm going to share my screen. And get started. So my title is Using a Repeat Sales Analysis to Determine if the 2015 Flood Event Caused a Loss in Property Values in Charleston, South Carolina. My lovely committee members are Dr. Blackwell, Dr. Burnett, Dr. Mothorpe, and Dr. Worzala. This is just a general outline of my presentation today. Like Dr. Blackwell said, we will have a Q&A session at the end, so if you just want to hold your questions till then. This is just kind of a background of how I came up with my issue, and will also give you a good overview and background of the topic itself. So I knew I was interested in flooding from my internship and just in general, the increase from climate change. But it's such a broad topic, so I really had to narrow it down and pick something that hasn't been researched before. So I'm going to go through each one of these little steps. First is the increase in flooding all over the globe from urbanization and sea level rise, which is just causing floodplains to expand. There's also an increase in coastal development, especially here in Charleston. And by 2100, it's projected that 2% of homes in the US will be inundated by coastal flooding. And just an example was Hurricane Katrina, which was and still is the costliest natural disaster in US history because of the flooding, and they just weren't prepared for it all. If you live in Charleston, you know that it's a coastal community susceptible to flooding and also storm surge, extreme weather events like hurricanes, sea level rise. And this is a map on the left of historical Charleston. all of these colored areas are where the city was, and these blank areas and all these creeks running through were just marshes and creeks that they have since filled in and built on, and that's where the city is today. So that's kind of explains a little bit why we have the flooding. And if you do live here, you probably noticed that these same areas that were filled in are where it floods today. So drainage issues are only worsening because sea level is now reaching above the drainage system, especially during the high tides, which is when we have sunny day flooding. The high tides will inundate the drainage system and it will just come up through the sewers, and it's not even raining. So this increases the flood events that we've been having. According to the National Weather Service, in the 1970s, there was an average of 2 flood events per year. And in 2019 alone, there were 89. So that includes the sunny day events and things and floods from hurricanes. So why did I pick Hurricane Joaquin out of all of the hurricanes we've been having? Because when I was going to look at doing my research idea, this was the only data that was available at the time. Well, the most recent data that was available, even though there have been other hurricanes since 2015. And it also gave me a good buffer because I'm trying to look at the impact after the event too. So I was able to have like a good 5-year time period before COVID of looking at the impact. And so Hurricane Joaquin was kind of interesting because it actually never made landfall in the US. It stayed out in the Atlantic, and it lasted for several days, just intense rain over South Carolina. And this rainfall map shows the areas that were hit the most with the rainfall, and you can see South Carolina is over there. Charleston County had 15 to 25 inches on average, and the mean lower low water line was 8.29 feet, which is just how they measure the tide. And the tide level in Charleston Harbor, or this is the highest tide level in Charleston Harbor since Hurricane Hugo in 1989 at the time. Since then, there have been other high tides, but in 2015, that was the highest. And those additional storms I was mentioning that have occurred between 2016 and 2019 are Hurricanes Matthew, Irma, and Dorian. And I'll be talking about them a little bit more later. Hurricane Joaquin caused extreme property damage in Charleston County, about $507 million worth, and 3,667 structures, including residential and other structures. I do want to mention the change in FEMA flood maps since my project has occurred. So this year in 2021, they did enact new ones. This shouldn't affect my project really because the 2004 maps were still in effect in 2015 during the flood, but in the future, if we do more studies, this might be something to consider. So there are different strategies that the city and homeowners are using to try to protect homes from flooding. So one of them is elevating homes. As of this year, 45 have been raised downtown or are in the process of being raised. And it is a really expensive process. It starts around $350,000 to raise because the houses are really close together and it's hard to get in there. And then the city and the Army Corps of Engineers has proposed a seawall construction project, which is 8 miles long to protect around storm surge. So between these two things that they're trying to do, plus all of my literature review where I found there isn't evidence of flood risk retained in the housing market, it's clear that there must be some type of impact on the real estate market if they're doing these things to prevent against it. So my project purpose is to determine if the 2015, well, determine and quantify how much the 2015 flooding impacted the property values, and these results might help buyers and sellers in the market kind of determine if it's worth it for them to buy. And the results might assist the city with the cost benefit analysis for the seawall project, again, if it's worth it and how much they could be saving by protecting the homes. So I'm going to go into my methods now. This is just how I found my data, what I did with my data, and all of that good stuff. So first, I found the USGS did put together some data using stream gauges and high water marks. I turned this data into this flood map over here. So the pink area is everywhere that they surveyed, and then the red is everywhere that flooded. So using this map, and then I went to find Charleston County property record data, and I was looking for all repeat sales in this boundary. So a repeat sale is when a property was sold before the flood, so before 2015, and then another sale after the flood. That way I can kind of tell how much it changed. Um, so I looked for all repeat sales in this boundary area, and this included the 29401 zip code and like parts of the 29403 zip code. So again, I was looking for one sale before the flood and one sale after the flood. I do want to note that was my goal, but while I was doing it, some properties, let's say, had a 2014 sale and a 2017 sale, which would have been perfect. That's what I was looking for. That is what I considered a straddling sale. And so I will be using that term later on. So I just want to make sure you know what that is. And while I was doing that, some of the properties, let's say it had the 2014 and the 2017 sale, but it also had a 2010 sale and like a 2020 sale. So I did keep that data in there because I didn't know if it would be important later on. So in that case, I do have a before the sale, repeat sale. The 2010 and 2014 would be a before the flood. Then the straddling would be the 2014 and 2017 sales. And then the 2017 and 2020 would be the after repeat sale. So it's kind of confusing, but I do use that terminology later. So I wanted to explain it now. And I did only look at single family properties, townhomes, and multifamily residences. And so with all of the before, straddling, and after data, I found 496 qualifying repeat sales. And so after I did that, I plugged it into this map, the addresses, and I was able to see if it was flooded or not flooded. So if you zoom in, it's easier to tell if the property was in the red or the pink area. And I categorized them, and then I tried to remove any confounding bias, such as renovations. Some properties in like a 2-year time period increased by 50 to 100% in value, which is kind of suspicious that something it was flipped or a renovation occurred. So in that case, I tried to remove them by first going to the city and county websites looking for permits and seeing if I could tell if it was renovated, but they only went back 18 months and were only for active permits. So that wasn't of any luck. But then I went on just online and I just searched for the address because all these properties did recently sell. And so some of them or most of them also had their listings still there, and they did say renovated in 2016. So if that was the case, I did remove the property, or if there was just a really large increase in price, I suspected something weird happened and removed it. I also cut off all of my data at April 7th, 2020, because that was when the South Carolina stay-at-home order was in place. And that's when people couldn't tour homes anymore. And I did adjust the sale prices for inflation using the consumer price index. I divided the sale price by the consumer price index. And then I used SPSS for my analysis. I did want to point out that I converted everything into a rate of change per day to equally compare everything. So I first calculated the percent change between sales, and then I divided that by the number of days between sales, because some might have more days than others. So I'm going to go into my results now. I did calculate all these using SPSS or Excel. So first I did look at all of the data, the 496, including the befores and afters, just to see what was going on. First, I did a t-test to compare the means of the rate of change per day for flooded versus not flooded properties, and I found it was not significant, which means that the means were not different between flooded and not flooded properties. And I also did a linear regression, just plugging in some different variables to see what I found. And you can see here the straddling properties did have a significant impact on the rate of change per day. And since straddling was what I was intending to look at anyway, I decided to just narrow down my data to that. So I now have a sample size of 364. This is just my descriptive statistics table. That comes in handy a little bit later or just for reference. So I also did a t-test to compare the means of the rate of change per day for flooded versus not flooded, and I found it was significant. So that means that the means between the rate of change per day for flooded and not flooded are different. And I did a linear regression. From here on out, I'm going to do a linear regression on just flooded because that was my intent, was to see if flooding impacted the property value. And I found that there was a significant decrease in the rate of change per day due to flooding. So further, I broke it down by type of property. So first I did the single family residences, and that was the largest sample size with 254. I did a t-test comparing the means of the rate of change per day for flooded versus not flooded and found that it was significant. Again, so that means that the rate of change per day means between flooded and not flooded were different. I did the linear regression again and found that there was a significant decrease in the rate of change per day due to flooding. And then for the townhome and multifamily, the sample sizes were pretty small, and neither had a significant results for the t-test or the linear regression, and that could be due to the sample size, but that's something we can maybe in a different study look more into. So last, I broke everything down into the year of the second sale. So in the repeat sale, there's the sale before the flood and the sale after the flood. So I broke it down by when did that second sale happen. So 2015 had a small sample size of only 19 because the flood did happen in October, so there weren't too many after that for the year. And then 2020 also had a pretty small sample size because the cutoff date that I cut for COVID. So then looking at everything, I did run the t-test like I did for everything else. And I found that 2016 had significant results and 2019. And then I also did a linear regression with flooding, and I found that there was significance in 2016, 2017, and 2019. So the reason that I did this was to look at some of the previous studies that I looked at. They saw that more of the impact from flooding was retained earlier on, so right after the flood, and then kind of tailed off. So I was trying to see if I saw significance right after the flood, so like 2015, 2016, 2017, and then tailed off. And I did, it was kind of hard to tell for 2015. And then 2016, I did have significant. 2017 over here was significant, but then it tailed off, but then it came back up. So I don't know if I would say that I found exactly what they found, but something interesting I noticed is that the years that all of these were significant were the same years that there were hurricanes. So 2016 was Hurricane Matthew, 2017 was Hurricane Irma, and 2019 was Hurricane Dorian. So I don't know. I didn't look at those other floods. I didn't have the data, so I don't know if that's why they were significant, but just something interesting. And so here is all of the data summary that I put together. So anytime that I already went over that the category was significant for the t-test, there's asterisks next to it based on the significance level. The rate of change per day is what I looked at, what I analyzed, and then I did convert everything into a rate of change per year, just because I think sometimes it's easier to like grasp how different it is just looking at the year rather than the day. So let's look at straddling because that was significant and that's what I was really looking at. Um, so for all flooded properties in my straddling sample, there was an 11.69% rate of change per year, and that was the increase for all those properties. And then for not flooded, it was 19.46. So you can see that the flooded didn't really increase as much as the not flooded, and that was significant. That was a significant difference between them. I'm going to go into my discussion now, just to show you how I quantified. Now that we see that there is a difference, we can see how much of it is there a difference. So first, I multiplied the beta coefficient for all flooding or for all straddling flooded sales by 365 to calculate the yearly rate, which was this. Then I multiplied the yearly rate by the average second sale price for straddling sales, which was $1.16 million, to calculate the average loss of $85,600 for each straddled property from 2015 to 2020. So that's how much they lost in the 5-year period. So for my limitations, I did mention earlier that some of my sample sizes were small for the multifamily townhouse 2015 and 2020. So in the future, maybe we can try to figure out a way to increase those sample sizes. And I also only looked at residential properties because they did sell quick, and but it would be interesting to maybe look at a different type of property and see um, if there was any results there. And then I also only looked at a relatively short time period compared to some of the previous studies I looked at. I only had a 10-year time period because the flood only happened in 2015. So I did 5 years before, 5 years after. And I also only looked at that one flood event, but it would be interesting to look at those others or even some of the sunny day flood events that happen all the time. How does that increase property values? And my intent was only to study the straddling repeat sales, which I found out later on as well. So maybe now that I prove that, if we do this again on other data, that we just kind of go straight to the straddling repeat sales. There's also possible effects from the Great Recession and COVID-19 because my data did start in 2010, and that's when the market was rebounding from the recession. And then COVID-19 had some funky impacts on the real estate market. So I did try to cut that out, but it could still have an impact on my results. And I did try to remove renovations, but I didn't have like a great method for doing so. So if we do this again in the future, try to figure out a better way to find those. And then based on my previous studies and just my knowledge, this is the first study in the Charleston area to examine the impact of flooding on repeat property values. So I really hope that there will be more studies using my results. And one further study I am conducting right now in my independent study class is if the elevation of all these properties affects the property values. So I am categorizing all the data, all the properties I looked at already, and seeing if they were either elevated to slab, crawl space, or 3 or more feet, which I considered elevated, and seeing if flooding impacts the price of those, like the slab more than the elevated or something similar to that. So I'm excited to see what those results are. And then what's next and how is this going to impact policy? I think my study definitely proves that there is an impact in the housing market and something needs to be done about flooding. But how is another story. There is the wall project, and then the city has some drainage projects like the Spring Fishburne one, which is set to finish in summer 2022. And I think that developing technology could also be used to improve the daily life of residents because of the increased frequency of flooding downtown. And this idea isn't really going to help get rid of flooding, but it will help us live around it. Would be to like make an app that tells you your street is flooded, go a different way, and there can be like sensors on poles or something similar to tell if it's flooded or not. And because I guess there is no definite answer or solution to fix flooding, but maybe some other things to help us better manage it. So in conclusion, properties with repeat sales straddling the 2015 flood saw a decrease in value through the rate of change per day from before to after the flood. And on average, these properties did see a loss of $85,600 in the 5 years after the flood. And I want to acknowledge my advisor, Dr. Blackwell. Thank you for meeting with me so many times over Zoom. It's been weird working on this virtually, but we're done now, so that's exciting. And thanks to my committee, Dr. Burnett, Dr. Mothorpe, and Dr. Worzala for always giving me great suggestions and comments to make this better and inspiring me to maybe publish this. I didn't even think of that as an option, but maybe we will. And the EVSS program, faculty and staff, I've learned so much, and I'm like really sad to be leaving. And thanks to Lucy for always answering my questions. I had so many. And my friends and family for always supporting me. There were many times I wanted to give up, but they pushed me to keep going. And that's it. So we can start the Q&A session now.
All right, thank you very much, Julie. That was great. So yeah, so the question and answer period is open. So if you're a Zoom regular and you know how to raise your hand, you're welcome to do that to ask a question. If you're less comfortable with that and you just would prefer to ask in the chat, you can do that. If you want to put on your camera and raise your hand, I'll try and keep an eye out that way as well. But yeah, we'll take a few minutes for questions if folks have them now. Go ahead, Lucy.
So I'm not even quite sure how to word this question due to my lack of knowledge of real estate, but I know that you said you only looked at residential properties, and thinking about how much it costs to just raise a property up, which is, I think you said $350,000 is the starting price. How do you think over the past 10 years this has impacted our lower income area of Charleston? Because yes, we focus more on that peninsula, but we do have government housing down in those areas. I was looking at the flooded areas, and we have quite a bit of government housing. I know you didn't assess that, but what do you think the overall impact is in terms of price with that, or what do you see in terms of a future?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a social impact because of flooding, because it's pushing people out of their areas if they can't afford to raise their home, or, you know, like all those houses on the Battery, they continue to sell and sell because people are willing to pay. They don't care if it floods, they'll pay for it to fix it. But in those lower income areas, they can't necessarily afford to fix it. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's definitely impacting them and pushing them out.
I have a question, if
Go
I
ahead.
could jump in. And Julie, congratulations again. This was just a nice presentation too, to see what you've been up to. And congratulations, you're the first of your cohort to do your defense. So way to go. That is an achievement, certainly. I guess, I mean, I have more of a question of, where are you going from here? What do you bring out of this project that you want to, what do you want to do after this party?
Well, I have my independent study, that I have that other study going on, but I'm really just looking to find a job, honestly. So I haven't thought much about where to, like, how else to use my results, but I'm hoping to use it in a job, my future job, my future
Well,
career.
I guess I was asking, what kind of job are you looking for too? Like, what do you want to do?
Ideally something with this type of stuff, but I don't know, it's pretty tough out there.
Yeah, and again, I would encourage you all to think about a publication for it too, because as you say, if no one's doing this kind of analysis, it would be really good for a lot of coastal cities to understand real estate dynamics after or enduring these kinds of hazard events over time. But congratulations and well done.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. I think I saw Amanda had her hand up. Do you want to ask a question, Amanda?
Yeah, good job, Julie. Congrats on defending. Great job. I had questions about the hurdles you faced when looking at the permit system. So even with your, I don't know how related your internship with the Charleston County was, but like even then you couldn't have access to that kind of information, even if it was like your thesis work.
Yeah, great question. That was after I wasn't working there anymore that I was looking at that. But so I was just looking at what was to the public.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess there wasn't really a lot of ways for you to appeal to Charleston County government to be like, I'm doing a study and could I access like these archived permits and all that kind of jazz. But I feel like that would have given you a lot more to work with as well, even though it also would give you a lot more data to be analyzing, but they could give you a lot more. And then I was also really interested with the hurdles that you face looking at renovations. And like, what kind of platforms did you use? What was the predominant platform that you used to see like these listings? Was it like mostly Zillow, like online ones, or was it like private real estate websites where they're like, oh, we have all these homes for sale by our agents or something like that?
I did just look online and just look at like Zillow and stuff to see the description of the listing, because it was usually still available because they were recently sold, and that's where it listed if there was a renovation.
Okay, cool. So it's usually just like the most accessible ones like Zillow, Trulia, stuff like that. Cool. Great job, Julie.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, looks like there's a question from Lucy in the chat. Julie, if you want to answer that.
Yeah. How do you think the impact of your results will be communicated and used by the general public? I really hope that somehow the city is able to like look at this for their drainage projects or for the wall or just any projects and use it as part of their analysis. And I also hope that property owners see this, because I know like moving here, I had no idea about the flooding. I mean, I've heard of it, but I didn't know how bad it was. So I want to help those people that, have no idea, and maybe they'll see this and maybe change their mind of if it's a good idea to live there.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
Hi, sorry. Julie, you did a great job. I was wondering, I know you only looked at the peninsula, but I was wondering if you'd given any thought as to how the surrounding areas might also have experienced impacts, like James Island or Johns Island or any of those areas. Like, do you think they may have also experienced that big of a decrease in the housing price?
Yeah, I think they did, and I did want to look at that, but the data that the USGS had it was only that like little part of the peninsula, and then there was another little area, like, I don't know, it was pretty far out in West Ashley or maybe Hollywood even, something like that. So I just looked at the peninsula though, but I want to in the future. I think that would be a great idea to look at other places if the data is available.
Julie, did you want to talk a little bit more about the sort of transparency issue and the records on flooding and flood insurance claims and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So when I first started, I was having trouble trying to get the data at first, and I was looking at some MLS data, but then it didn't go all the way up to 2020. And then I started looking on like Zillow for property record sales, but then I didn't know if I should really trust it because some of it was like, I guess, not aligning with each other. So then I ended up looking at the Charleston County property records, and I trusted that much more because it started to align better with the MLS data, and it did go all the way up to 2020. So I went with that. Is that your question?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, we were talking about flood insurance claims, and can you find out if a property has made a flood insurance claim and how that data is actually not publicly available.
Yeah.
And the sort of, but that's something that's important to know if you're buying a house.
Yeah. Like I wasn't able to, I didn't know how many of the properties in my area actually did have a flood insurance claim or actually flooded. Like I didn't know that information.
Yeah, for those of you that are learning about real estate, I'm the real estate professor that's on the committee, and yeah, that is a very big issue. And with any luck, over time, this transparency will get better. Also, for those of you that are currently working on projects, Zillow, we have a friendly person in Zillow now, and data can be gotten from that friendly person. So Andrew Kraus, I think, Chris, do you know Andrew? Have you met him yet? He's very active with an association that Chris and I are part of. And I was at a presentation last week, and he said they will make data available. You have to fill out a form on the Zillow, et cetera. And it's only certain kinds of data, but you still can get data from them. And then, like I said, FEMA and also other real estate companies are trying to get more transparency, as Kelvin said. I had a question on, Julie, on the, because I really liked the question by Annette. And I know you didn't do it, but do you think maybe it would have been good to break up your data by submarkets? Because again, part of the problem with doing the whole peninsula is there's very, very different markets, right? You've got the Battery, beautiful $1 million, $4 million, $8 million homes that got inundated with water. And I'm sorry, not the Battery, the edge of the peninsula, but then you've got, you know, up off Upper King and off of East Bay, and they also get flooded regularly, but that price point is so much lower and the actual buyers are so different. So, you know, in markets, again, are supply and demand, right? And price shifts based on that supply and demand at a given point in time for a given marketplace. So did you give any thought to that, like stratifying that data? I mean, I didn't notice in terms of the breakup of the data, you know, price points. You clearly, it was huge, it was a big range. So what do you think? Do you think you could do that? Because that would make it a much more valuable study. Because right now it's just everything's merged, you know, the markets all merged together.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea to include. Yeah, as you saw, my like average price was like 1.16 million. So that's definitely not, you know, covering.
Right. I mean, I'm sure there were 200,000 in the sales in the data. There are probably 200,000, maybe 300, maybe the low point, but certainly lower than $1.5 million. And then, you know, outrageously priced properties on the other end. So anyways, that was just a thought. Yeah. And again, for those of you that want to do some real estate research, that's really, really important. It's very important to segment that market to who the consumer is for that kind of property. Anyways, that's just a comment. And thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Julie, great presentation. Thanks for teaching us a little bit about this today. So I had a question. So you found some different rates of appreciation based on if a house was flooded or not, those straddling homes. And you talked about the sort of typical investment it might take for someone to raise their home, to elevate their home. So I was wondering if you thought about, so for like an average house in your data set, if they were to raise their home and assuming that this prevented them from being flooded, how many years down the road would that investment sort of pay off based on the different rates of appreciation? Is like 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like well, if you see the pictures of how they're raising them, they definitely look like they're raised over 6 feet or more. And so I think that it would last them a while, and hopefully it would get their house back and not, or the rate of change per day would start to even out more. But I didn't see anything about that in my previous studies that I was looking at.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I think we have time for one more question if there are any more out there. Or maybe 0 more questions. Thank you all for attending. I appreciate you paying attention and coming today. We're going to let everyone who's not on the committee, we're going to ask everyone who's not on the committee rather to give us a chance to talk with Julie, just the 4 of us, or 5 of us, I guess. Then we'll meet privately and then we'll talk with Julie. So thank you all for attending, and I'm sure Julie will let you know the outcome shortly. And yes.
Great job, Julie. Bye.